welcome to an episode of the Sinead Says podcast. This week we have Jen Cameron on, who is a qualified relationship specialist and a psychotherapist. And I actually did a podcast with her on her podcast, The Power of You. Before, I was just really intrigued by her, and I was like, I would love to have you on to talk about relationships, because it's been a while since we had a little episode on relationships. So I thought I would bring the expert in herself to talk about all the questions that you gave me this week on relationships. And we really wanted to get into commitment issues and trust issues and sort of, see what's going down. Jen, welcome to the podcast, and tell us a little bit about your journey and how you got here to this the specialist of relationships. What drove you to be where you are now?
Yeah, well, hi Sinead, and thanks so much for having me on. I'm so excited for this podcast today. I suppose when I go back over the time when I started my training and became a psychotherapist, I realized quite quickly within my practice that every individual person that's coming in is always talking about somebody else. They're bringing somebody else into the therapy room. So the idea that we are relational beings and that we thrive on relationships and that we really need them to feel fulfilled and connected and part of something bigger in our life purpose was really obvious. And I suppose the other side for me was that, relationships, I was always fascinated myself about relationships, how people connected and, why we were drawn to some people and not drawn to others. And I suppose the negative patterns that we can be drawn to, and how that impacts us. And fear of commitment was one of them for me. So I always found that really interesting. So it kind of pushed me further into my studies around relationship specialist. And yeah, now I specialize most of the time with couples, but it's just a fascinating space to be in and a real honor, because every relationship can be wonderful, but they're also complex and unique. And there's no one shoe fits all. So it's to be open to kind of what's working for a couple and what's not, and how they can get back on track, which is really amazing. So it's an honor when couples sit with me.
Yeah, that was good, right? So there was one thing you said there that really stood out to me, and I would love to talk about it, about us being attracted to negative patterns. Yeah. And that is something that I've heard. And like, I see it with people all the time. I'm like, you're literally going out with your dad. Like, you're like, do you know what I mean? And like, people are like, oh, I can't deal with him because he's too nice. And that I'm always like, it's because you're not used to that. And it's very unfamiliar for you if someone is nice and you're not attracted to it. You're attracted to something else. So yeah, what is the meaning and behind attracting negative patterns?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a really good one. A lot of people find that themselves trapped in these patterns. And like you said, even with somebody who may be treating them good and they're like, this is a bit boring, it's because they're used to a certain element of chaos. And really, we can trace back some commitment fears to childhood. So there's three main types of childhood, like trauma that can happen that affect us when we're older. So one of them would be when our parents maybe, or a parent caregiver doesn't model really positive, effective, emotional health. So that might look like if a mom or a dad is very open about their emotions, but they could appear quite, say, upset or erratic, or kind of very kind of high and low if something's happening in the moment, and a child might witness that and then take on the idea that, okay, my parents basically lost control here, this is a very scary space to be in. So what they learn is that emotions and connections, relationships equal fear. So if I start to allow myself to be emotionally comfortable with somebody or intimate, that this is going to happen to me, that I will become an emotional wreck. So they take that on. And this obviously is happening unconsciously, so it's that drive that can happen. And then there's one where it's shame. So I suppose children can feel like they carry shame for their parents when their needs aren't being met. So what that means is they believe that if they want somebody too much, when you're an adult, the person who fears commitment, you believe if you want somebody too much that they'll reject you, that they won't want you. But that's not true, because that's a distorted belief that comes from childhood, where you felt shame in that relationship with a parent figure. And how that happens is, for instance, your child is sick. Like, children depend on parents for survival, for all their needs initially. So for instance, if your child is sick and they go to their parent and they want a hug, but the parent can't give them a hug at that time, or they're busy, they basically deny them that need. The child unconsciously goes into that space of, I can't seek out my needs to be met. I'm not worthy. I don't deserve my needs to be met, because they go into ego thinking. So then they believe when they get older and they're looking for somebody, or they're putting themselves out there, that if I'm too much, like if I ask for my needs to be met, that person's going to deny me of it, because this has happened before. That makes sense?
Yeah.
So I suppose there's a couple of things. There's also the idea that, like, really rejection and abandonment. So if a parent, say for instance, a dad maybe isn't protective of a child when they're young, or a mom doesn't show compassion, that's quite generalized, but to use them two things, there can be times where a child may feel then quite scared because they don't have protection or compassion in whatever they're going through in a moment. And it makes a child feel like, again, that they're not worthy, that they're not good enough, but more importantly, that they're the reason why their needs aren't being met. And 3 fundamental needs that children need to be met are to be seen, to be heard, and to be authentically expressed to. And if we miss them pieces with our child, they will grow up feeling like they are not good enough. And they carry that into these relationships. So many people might say, I didn't go for that person because, deep down they have that fear that I'm not enough, or they will eventually reject me. They won't like me. So this is how you fall into these patterns. You seek out people who are doing these behaviors that you've experienced before, but it drives that fear pattern. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm like, oh, because I'm like, with commitment issues, I feel like my commitment issues, I thought that they came from a relationship and from before. Like, do you think you can, get these commitment issues after a failed relationship? Or do you think it kind of always stem from something in childhood? Or do you think it can be developed after a heartbreak?
Yeah. So I think that them 3 examples that I gave in the childhood piece, that's not for everybody with commitment issues, but it certainly meets a lot of people. There is also definitely past, disruption, hurt, pain in a relationship. So if you've had a negative traumatic experience in a relationship, maybe where you've been gaslighted, emotionally, mentally, verbally, physically, abused in some way, or made feel not enough or not good enough, that can leave a huge wound. Or, if somebody's cheated on you. So any negative experience in a past relationship can also lead to fear of commitment. But there's a number of things. Like, the main thing that's common with fear of commitment is the fear. So like, some people have fear because of their insecurities, fear of rejection, fear losing control, fear intense emotions in general, what love brings up.
Yeah.
Some people fear being vulnerable, that the idea of really being vulnerable, it's beyond terrifying for them. It's so, so terrifying that they will avoid it nearly at all costs. There's fear of abandonment, fear of being uncomfortable in their own body, just not being comfortable in their own skin, and not being worthy of another's love. So there's kind of 10, 11, 12 different things and reasons why people may fear commitment, all very relevant, but again, all very unique to the individual.
How would you recognize that you personally have commitment issues? Like, I didn't know I had commitment issues until like I, read Attached, and I was like, oh crap. So, and and I would have just went on my life continuing on this pattern if I didn't recognize it. So what are the indicators that you have, commitment issues, or you're an avoidant?
Like, such a great question. So many people, sometimes there's the classic. So again, there's a few that I'll go through, but like, one might be where somebody's quite open and they're just like, I just want something casual, not into anything serious. So it's the ability just to be open. Another might be somebody who acts quite unsure and very inconsistent. So they want connection, but then when they get it, they're a bit like cold feet and sort of like, don't know if I'm feeling this today. So self-sabotage is a big thing if you self-sabotage within a relationship. Another one would be where people may talk to lots of guys or lots of girls. And the idea around this is that if I don't talk to just one person, then I'm safe. I'm not going to fall for one person. Whereas if I'm dating or seeing like 5, 6, 7, 8 people, then I'm protecting myself because I won't be vulnerable. So that behavior is very telling of somebody who has commitment fears. Avoiding all responsibility. So this is kind of one that we see a lot. Somebody who may be in a relationship, but if their partner gets sick or ill, they find it really difficult to show up for them. Financial sharing, so if somebody's deciding to go and get like a mortgage or like just even rent together or something like that, that requires a financial piece, and they're slow to move or really, I suppose, digging their heels in, that can be a sign. And the number one, I suppose, is when people, if you have a child and maybe that person disappears. So the idea is that they feel that you are taking too much of them. You're squashing their freedom, so to speak. So they will run from that. Another one would be when somebody is shy to their vulnerability. So, when you get into a relationship, after a while, people get very comfortable and naturally your partner starts to see different sides of you. Like, you have your bad days, or you might have, an angry outburst, or you might, you do something just very normal for you, but maybe you get to a point where you're comfortable. So you're showing all these sides of yourself. I suppose what I had to say is like the good, the bad, and the ugly. We all have it. But when you start to show this side to yourself, this person with commitment issues or somebody who is commitment phobe may start to feel very, very uncomfortable very quickly in that presence. So you're having these thoughts, talking, shouting, whatever, and they're becoming literally in every way uncomfortable, so much so that they want to leave the room, and they may. But the thing about this is they're unable to manage your feeling, but also they're actually really unable to be in their own feeling. For them to have any emotion around this or themselves is just way too difficult. So it comes back to them again and their inability to be vulnerable with another person. And this is what we'd call, this happens in relationship hopping. So when you see somebody with somebody for 6 months, oh, it's great, boom, done. With somebody for 6 months, great, boom, done. It's that whole honeymoon period. So it's like we enjoy the first bubble and then we're out of there. First bubble, out of there. So that's a real classic sign of somebody with commitment issues as well. And there's just a couple of more, I suppose, that are relevant because everyone is individual. So sometimes it's people who convince themselves that they're really, really happy that they're single.
Okay. And
I always find this one really interesting, because I was single for a long time and I genuinely was like, this is great. Like I was real freedom person, I love just being free and single. But I suppose, as we said at the start, we are relational beings and we do need people in our lives to thrive. So the idea with someone who's very single, you can come across, I suppose, if somebody's commitment phobe, how you know if they're single is they can be very, very comfortable in their own loneliness and their own skin. So they could be very like, oh, this is just my space. This is how I am. I'm a loner and I'm totally proud of it. Like living my dream. And they can appear sometimes maybe a little aloof because of the loneliness piece. But even though all of that might be true for that person who's single at the time, really they're in denial because loneliness still exists. And we know how powerful loneliness is with people of all ages. And it does affect us. So we need others to thrive, and the relational being piece is so relevant to our fulfillment that it's kind of, you have to wipe clean that denial piece and say, okay, is this choice that we're like, oh, I'm happy single because it makes us feel better and not rejected? Or is it because there's something more to it? So I think that's a really important one, and that we wouldn't necessarily look at, as a fear of commitment. And then there's a classic, the go towards. So we run towards somebody all in, like love bombing. This is the person I want. And then really quickly, it's like run away. So straight back out once that person returns anything. And I suppose the last one for me that I see a lot is where somebody wears a mask. So I'm sure you've heard of this, people wear masks. We all wear masks every day in different ways. But somebody whose fear of commitment would really be very, very, very vulnerable. So the idea of another person even affecting them is too much. So they have to maintain this mask all the time, that I am okay, we're in this relationship, but everything stays at a level, so there's never depth of feeling. It's just at a surface level, consistency. Yeah. So they're really all the signs of somebody or an individual, and everyone wouldn't have all of them signs, obviously. I mean, they're just lots of different types of signs that may come up.
I have so many questions after that.
Yeah.
I'm like, where do I begin? Okay, let me talk. I'm like, what? Okay, so first question I'm going to ask is the person who's in denial, right?
Yeah.
How would they ever see what they're missing out on? Like, how, I feel like that I was that person and I was in denial as well. So I'm probably asking it from my own heart, but and like I'm trying to see like what point. I think like there was a few like books and stuff that I had read, and it was like, whoa, like if I don't like let someone in, I'm gonna miss out on this massive piece of like spiritual growth and growth as a person. And I think like it's also very easy though to go, I can't be dealing with that. I don't want to deal with that. Like, I don't need that. Like, I'm fine by myself, especially those people that are so fine by themselves. Like, I am so fine by myself. Like, especially now that I've like, became more aware and stuff. So before, no, I wouldn't have been okay. I would have been like, keep me and keep me safe. But now, so yeah, like how do you describe that feeling of like getting past the commitment issues and becoming that vulnerable person? Like I can obviously vouch for it as well, because I was saying, and like I went past all of it and like it was scary, and it still comes up for me a lot as well. So it's not like it's forever gone, but like everything that comes up is an opportunity to heal. So so how would you like, what would you, I don't know, because you're in a relationship as well, you're just about to have a baby, you're about to pop over there, so what would you describe as like what they're missing out on?
I suppose I feel like for me personally, I would have felt that my biggest thing that drew me to my relationship that I'm in and my marriage was absolute acceptance. My partner very early on was very accepting of me in every way that I was. And I feel that gave me the confidence and the ability to build trust and to know that this was something more. So even of the fear of commitment, it was bigger. He was patient. There was lots of things that kind of gave me time, and he was kind of very good at like managing, sounds awful, but really managing my roller coaster of, I think when we got together first, actually it's really fun. Like this is a pure example. We got together and we were together 6 months and I booked a flight to Australia and just went for 6 weeks. And he was like, what are you doing? I was like, I'm going to Australia, just see my friends or whatever. Like I'd been before and stuff, and he was like, well, would you not think to ask me? And even now to this day, like 10 years later, he still just say it to me. He's like, oh yeah, we get in a relationship and you just book a flight to Australia. But like, it just shows, but he gave me that space. There was always, and even now, like I still need a certain amount of freedom. So for me, I suppose the thing is the acceptance is really big. But to give you some advice, I suppose, for people who maybe are fearing commitment and how they can try and come out of that, or know that they're in it. You know, sometimes people, like you said, aren't really fully aware that they're in it. So some ways would be to be really honest, to have that conversation with yourself. If you feel like, you know, there's something that you want in your life, particularly with another person or a romantic relationship, and it's not happening for some reason, it's kind of saying, do I have a wall up? Am I safeguarding? What's my big fear here? How do I feel about myself? And how do I want somebody else to feel about me? So that's something that somebody can just do themselves to try and say, am I happy or am I content right now? Another way would be, you know, to make room to face your fears. Like everyone has fears. We all have insecurities. And usually people, I suppose, do need therapy for this of some sort, because you need a therapist to facilitate this process for you. Like if we could all work out everything in our heads, and we'd be flying, you know. But I suppose it's to learn to be vulnerable. So to be able to be open to heartache, to pain, to rejection. And by adulthood, the majority of people have already experienced that anyway, whether it's through a parent, a family fallout, like something, you know, a relationship. Because on the other side of that is, you know, joy and belonging and connection and success and, you know, all of them things. We can't have one without the other, I suppose. And the idea is that if we want all the feels, we have to embrace them all. But a lot of the time people need to have somebody to help them with that. So facing that fear and opening yourself up to the emotions, embracing the anxiety, because when we face the emotions, we are really opening up a space to move through them and to let go of them patterns or them pains that we've had, so they don't define us. You know, for a lot of people, when they've had heartache in relationships and then when they're trying to move on, they can sort of unconsciously be holding on to that idea that, well, you know, love equals absolute heartache and I will not go there again. So they need to recognize that. I mean, you need to recognize, are you a wounded person through love? And then there's also the side of, when we look at the childhood piece that I was saying earlier, that's about looking really at how to unlearn distorted beliefs. So the idea that emotions make me a wreck, you know, if that's what you see when you're a child or experienced, it's learning boundaries. So not just pouring your heart out to everybody, seeing red flags, knowing what red flags are, and deciding who deserves your vulnerability. And like, we keep coming back to vulnerability because I think sometimes people don't connect vulnerability with relationships. And only because if you're at surface level, you may think, well, I don't need to be vulnerable ever with somebody. But really, to have the best relationships and best quality relationships, I mean, we have to do that, put ourselves out there vulnerably, which nobody necessarily initially enjoys. You know, it's scary. So it's to take that leap. And therapy can help with that. Or like you said, reading, there's so much now, like your podcast, you know, different things that are out there where people can touch in. To let go of the belief that if I let people in, they could disapprove and then they will hurt me. Sometimes a person who's like fearing commitment, they need to look at that and say, am I that person that says that, you know, oh, if I let this guy in or this girl in, that they're definitely going to hurt me because they won't like parts of me. This is a judgment of self. So it's when you're actually judging yourself and you're feeling shame, but you're projecting it onto somebody else. You may have the idea that, like, you know, love hurts and love is difficult, but the truth is love doesn't hurt. Love is wonderful. What hurts is when we build walls and when we keep ourselves away from people and we don't allow ourselves to fully be free of judgment in our relationship.
Yeah. Because I think as well, like the commitment issues are most of the time unconscious. So you're like doing things like self-sabotaging, like maybe you're like randomly flirting with someone else or liking someone else's photos. That's kind of like, it's actually to keep them sort of at arm's length because you don't want to be the person that's heartbroken. You want to do the things first or whatever. But when it comes to love, like I always say that, like, a heart that's been broken is a heart that's been loved, and like that's almost worth it to be in the love first. If you break up or you are rejected, is that you need to learn the coping skills to deal with that. And when you learn those coping skills, you can almost throw yourself into the relationship. Because I feel like after my really hard time, I felt like I developed the coping skills. And then when I knew that I was going to be okay if I was to be heartbroken again, that was when like that next step came in for me. And I
Yeah,
really think that like to know that there is tools to deal with heartbreak and to deal with that, like that is so important for stepping forward into vulnerability, because there is no better feeling than being like so vulnerable with someone. And even though it does seem really scary, but yeah, I think those coping skills are what's important, and that's what needs to be sort of learned first as well.
definitely. And like you said, Sinead, like it's part of life. Like
Mm,
we will all experience heartache and rejection and pain and love, even if we try and avoid it, we will still experience it. So like having them skills, and the only way you have them is by going through it. But by nearly riding the storm, and saying, okay, this is temporary. It's keeping perspective as well. But sometimes we lose perspective when you're in heartbreak or in the chaos of a difficult relationship or a breakdown, or fear, like feeling real rejection, which is triggering you back to something that you're not even aware of. It can be very terrifying.
yeah.
That's why the importance of sharing, our thoughts and where we are. We have to normalize heartache. We still very much so go by, certain movies. Like when you look at all the children movies now, for instance, it's all the fairy tale. It's all the idea that, oh, well, you go up and you're just going to meet one person and then it's fabulous and all this. And the thing is, it's really how we look at love. Like, I don't believe love is enough for a relationship to
Mm-hmm.
be successful. I believe clearly it's very important and it is needed. But there's a whole piece of choice and energy, time, work that has to go into a relationship in order to maintain it and keep it good. And even at that, there will be days that will be bad and good days. And I think when we have a clear perspective of what does a healthy relationship look like, then when we're going through these heartaches, or we can say, right, that's not, I'm actually not in a healthy relationship and I didn't even realize. But now when I list these things or look at this list, I can say, I don't have that, I don't have that, or, oh, I do have that. This is a bad day. I can manage this. You just have a better perspective and a better awareness of what a relationship is. So instead of going by just what we've witnessed when we're young, because we think every relationship when we're young, as in maybe your parent or caregiver or whoever's the baby people around you, we take that on as our norm. We're conditioned. So we think, oh, that's how somebody must treat you in a relationship. But often, like, people, and most of us don't get it right all the time, because it is a learning curve forever. So we're all just trying our very best. So the idea to be open and to communicate that and be in your heartache and be supportive, to support each other, is huge to be
Yeah.
able to move forward. Yeah.
So while we're on that subject of like, working on a relationship, the thing that people would say to me in my DMs is like, my boyfriend won't talk about his emotions. And that's very, very common. And it's like, how do we get them to talk, or how do we, bring good communication into the relationship?
Well, that's a really good question and really key, because yeah, like typically we're still very much so in that space where men maybe aren't as comfortable to open up or talk about their emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that, again, is from that conditioning when we're quite young and what we see, the man stiff upper lip kind of thing, the woman that's the wreck in the movie. The idea is that, I suppose, one, it's really important to be patient, to give the person space, but to make your relationship always a priority. So at all stages of your life in this relationship, it's important that you are making time to communicate. Women need emotional connection, emotional intimacy more than men, and men need physical intimacy generally more than women. But that's very general to say that, but that's usually how we relate love, as men and women in particular. That shows that you have to let your partner know what it is you need in these conversations. And a lot of the time, I suppose, men, it's not that they don't feel what we feel, but they don't process the same as us. They don't really need to overtalk the emotional piece. But what we know in relationships, for them to be healthy, the number one thing is to have communication. Like relationships only last when we have good communication. So I suppose my advice for couples generally around communicating, if they're finding it difficult, is to go for a walk, drive in a car. Side by side behaviors are very less threatening. So men sometimes can feel threatened, with that kind of one-to-one, face-to-face, let's sit down and talk about something. So it's all about kind of where you do it, how you do it. Use I statements. I feel it would be great if we could talk about this, or I feel I'd love us to do this together. What do you think? Stay away from all you.
Yeah.
You said you'd do this, you said you'd say that. It's about saying, what's your plan? What would you like to do or see us be? Where would we be at in a year? So a lot of practical things that you can, I suppose, help encourage slowly, but timing is key. The other side is know your partner. Like my partner is a real morning person. If I want to talk to him about something, like first thing in the morning is the time for him. However, I'm not like that. So I need at least a couple of hours.
Yeah.
So it's knowing your partner. If I want to have a conversation with him, I need to be able to pick a time that I know that's good for him, that he's in his best space, not when he's coming in from work maybe and busy and, we're in the chaos of the kids and stuff. Like that's just going to be a disaster. And I suppose every negative experience that we have around communication and relationship, it does the same thing. It embeds that cycle of communication is bad, so we want to keep things, roll it all back and keep it open. It often helps too when we have friendships or circles where like men and women are open to communicating. So, if you have a couple who are like very open or maybe like to communicate about different things, that can be very helpful for a relationship too, particularly for a man to try and help him engage a bit more.
Yeah. Well, what we do is we just do it like weekly. We do like we'll do it at dinner or a walk, or we'll just be like, yeah, let's do our fanos now. And then I told you about the fanos.
Yes.
I don't know if I've mentioned it on this podcast.
Oh, you said it to me the last time. It was amazing. Yeah. So that's a great idea.
Feeling, affirmation, need, ownership, and struggle. So it's kind of the whole works, and like it only takes 10 minutes. So you just so mine's is just like I would feel like, say, right, I could say like I feel really insecure this week, like after Christmas and blah, blah, blah. I would say things like that, like say, and then he would like reassure me, and then we would be fine, like da, da, da. And then like affirmation is like, I really appreciated it whenever you got me flowers and like you did our anniversary. Like that was really amazing. And like I always say, like Jack always looks after the laundry and the electricity, and that's like his job, right? And like the electricity never goes out. He always be checking it because he knows it's his job. And I'm like, I really appreciate that. I feel really looked after whenever the last electricity doesn't go out. It's little things like that you don't tell your partner, like usually within communication. So I think like that moment, he's like really, he feels affirmed, and he's like, oh, okay. Like, and then he never lets it go out because he knows how much it means to me. So yeah, and then need is like something that you need. It could be even something like you could like need more intimacy, or you could need more alone time, or just more, usually like I need more me time. Like the both of us are very me time-ish. And that's good because sometimes you feel like, oh, maybe I should spend more time. And then like when they tell you exactly what they need. And then ownership is like maybe something, so like there's two things you can do, like a show and tell. Like say something happened, like say like an ex like reacted to a story, something so random, or or an ex text you, or like somebody tried to chat you up in the gym, that's your opportunity to say like, just like, like this happened. And then instead of it coming back, because like maybe like my phone's sitting there one day and he like sees that someone wrote to me or something, like what, it's that opportunity to just share that, like show and tell. Or an ownership could be like, I'm really sorry that like I got drunk and didn't text you, and that's another ownership. And then struggle then is like something you could struggle with. You could say like, I'm really struggling with finances this week, I'm really struggling with loneliness, or something like that. So, and then like you talk about it and you're like, okay, let's put steps in. So yeah, we actually do that most weeks, like, and not every week. I'm not going to put it there. Like, so it's just, and it's quick, it's 10 minutes. And I always say, like, I know boys like feel like they don't want to talk about that stuff, but whenever, I the me time thing is so important, because Jack was like, oh, I need me time to watch my shows and to play my Xbox or whatever, or like to do.
Yeah.
Like without that little statement, I probably would have been like, you know, are you okay? Because obviously he's out here as well, like by himself. So like I'm always like,
Yeah.
are you okay? Do you need friends? Do you need me? So like for him to say that, like it's an opportunity then for him to just have his own time or whatever. So I think like men, when they know that that's like the benefit of it, that they can actually get their needs met and they can say it openly without them being offended. I think that's
Yeah.
yeah.
Completely. And like, that's wonderful. Like, that's amazing. Like, everything that you're saying is so relevant. Like, when communication is broken down, basically in relationships, we need to meet each other's needs. But that doesn't mean that everybody needs to have hour-long conversations every week. If you're hitting them needs, like encouragement, praise goes such a long way. Appreciation, like you said, it's like the love languages, love languages. Gary Chapman has that book. You know, when we understand what our partner's needs are and we're meeting them, we're all generally happy, and we all want to feel appreciated and supported and seen and heard and validated. And, you know, we want that connection, and all of that builds that emotional intimacy, which is what makes romantic relationships as well as physical intimacy, you know, unique in what they are. So it's keeping it special and prioritizing it. And I think that's a fantastic idea to do that, like even every other week, or, you know, just to be aware, like that's a simple tool that people can really take on, which is amazing.
Yeah. And then if you don't do it, like it'll come out when you drink. That's
Yeah.
why I'm like, if we haven't done like 2 weeks and I'm like, oh, why are you know what I mean? It comes out when you drink, or it comes out
Yeah.
whenever you like break a glass. And you're
Yeah.
like, what are you doing? You did this last week and you did that. Like
Yeah.
it comes out anyway, so you may as well like get it out of the way.
Completely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's communication. I'd say now another big question for everyone is, you know, the act of cheating. And yeah, infidelity, you know, affects 70% of the population, apparently, which I well believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
That's
I
high.
just it's crazy. Even if it's like they're, you know, in their family, or that it's within them,
Yeah.
70% of people have dealt with it within their life. I think that's that's the last time I checked, right?
Yeah.
And there was a few questions in it about, you know, how to recover from infidelity. So there's that moment of, are you going to take the person back? And like, what determines, I don't know if you've dealt with this in your practice where like cheating has happened, but like what determines like taking them back and giving them another chance and being like, no, fuck you.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of that, like, I suppose, again, everyone's very individual when there's infidelity within their relationship. And as long as relationships have been happening, infidelity has been happening. So it kind of poses the idea that once we're committed to somebody on some level, you know, there's always that idea of, oh, could we be with somebody else? So is there something being threatened within us? And like, that doesn't mean obviously that everyone would cheat, but it just means that the potential is always there. I suppose when somebody is deciding if they're going to take somebody back or not, a lot of factors really depend on their current situation. So for women, generally, it can be a case of, you know, we have small children, or financially I'm quite dependent on this person, and I still love them, but I've maybe denied them a little in our relationship. So maybe there's been young children and their sex life hasn't been as great, or they haven't given as much time to their partner, like their children have become their priority. So sometimes women will say, well, I am a part of this. And the thing is that when any relationship breaks down, or when there's a lack or something happens, it is always about two people. And a lot of people find that really hard to hear, you know, like, so, but that is the truth. There's a lack, and that's why something happens. The difference with somebody who's like, no, I'm not going to be with that person, this is it. A lot of that can be about a high level of pride and, I suppose, self-worth, self-esteem. But sometimes what can happen there is that people are more scared of how others will see them.
Yeah, ego.
Than actually what they want. So it can be the ego. So it can really just be reaction off the hip, you know. And you really see it when maybe somebody might go out and go, well, you won't believe what he did, blah, 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 or what she did. You know, they're quite vocal in the moment. But then it's like, okay, actually, this is what I want, and I'm heartbroken. Like I do see, when I see a lot of couples can really come through infidelity. But it's only if they acknowledge and get to the bottom of why it happened in the first place.
Yeah.
And then they learn to recreate that within their relationship and bring that bond back. I mean, it's definitely hard because there's shame, there's embarrassment, and also for the person who's committed the cheating act, you know, like a lot of the time they can feel very vulnerable and very awful or shocked, I suppose. And it can be about, maybe sometimes it's as simple as just a bit of flattery, you know, somebody showed them a bit of flattery, a bit of attention. Again, women tend to have emotional affairs, men tend to have physical affairs. So men might have a physical affair and literally they'll be like, it meant nothing, like it was sex. That is it. A need was met. And for women, an emotional affair is nearly a bit more dangerous because they've invited somebody in, they're confiding in them, they're sharing about their intimate relationship. And really, like we said earlier, that's what you do when you're in your own relationship. You know, you want to build emotional intimacy so that keeps you special as a unit. So ever inviting a third person into that is always a dangerous thing. And I suppose in answer to your question, everybody is just unique. And sometimes people react quite quick, and sometimes they decide they'll stay for different reasons. And whether it's love alone, it rarely is, I have to say, from what I've seen. It's very rare that somebody is, say, you know, carefree like a couple, and then somebody says, I'll stay just because. But also there's the idea that maybe they won't meet somebody else, or they're not good enough. You know, if I'm in this relationship and this person has cheated on me, well, then that reinforces some childhood trauma of I'm not good enough, so I'm not going to leave them, because if they're meant to love me and they did this, then God knows what Joe Bloggs is going to do down the road if I leave. You know, so sometimes it's better the person I know than what maybe I deserve or I'm worth or I want.
Yeah. And I think as well with cheating, it can be down to a lot, like you probably have read Esther Perel's, or do you know?
Yeah, she's fantastic. Yeah.
So I actually have her book here, like it's so random, it's just sitting there, but it's called
The State of
Affairs.
Yeah.
And that really changed my view, because she like likes to rethink infidelity. And when you read the book, you can see all these different scenarios and see it from the point of view of like the two people and why it happens, because they're all and like people will probably be triggered by this conversation, because, you know, when someone cheats, it's like it's his fault or it's her fault and blah blah blah. But like, what's going on in that relationship? Something has definitely happened.
Yeah.
Sometimes there is fucking dickheads out there who just don't give a shit. But like, then those dickheads, like, this is what I would think, then the people that are doing it, there's a lack of communication of what's going on in the relationship, and there's something going on. There's a lack of, it is two people. And then I think a lot can come down to like real insecurity, and the commitment issues as well is definitely brought into it, because it keeps them from being hurt. So they do it almost first. That's definitely like, even when I got cheated on, like it was so difficult for me, because I was like, we were so in love and it was so confusing. And I just thought all men were like awful after, because I was like, how can you be so in love with someone and do this? And then like I never got any closure from it, but I did then, like a year and a half later, we met up to like have a closure talk. And the things he said to me, like, it was insane. Like, he was like, I literally thought you were cheating on me all the time. Like, I never felt like good enough for you ever. I would lie a bit in bed at night thinking you were texting people, chatting to people. Like, you know, then there was that he just did self-sabotage. You know, he was just like, I need to do it first. I need to take back the control of how I'm feeling. And he didn't understand how to articulate his insecurity to me. So I think like insecurity and lack of communication of your feelings can really lead to this whole thing. And then there's all those other reasons, like in the book there's all these different reasons. Like there's emotional, you know, whenever they're not getting their intimacy and the emotionalness that they need in the relationship. And they've got scapegoat, which is where they're actually in the relationship and they really don't want to be in it, but they just do not know how to tell their partner with their words. So they do something like that.
They effectively dump themselves. You know, it's that classic do a move that will prompt hopefully that other person to then end the relationship.
But I think like if you've had the initial cheat on, right, and they've cheated on you, and then you get down to these exact reasons, you know, the exact reasons, like the insecurity, the self-sabotage, the commitment issues, if you get down to those and really work through them, then like it can be saved. And I've seen it be saved before
Completely.
as well, because like there is so much love between people, and sometimes it's a reaction from the girl or the boy because they can't like communicate what they're feeling inside, and then once that big thing happens, they're able to communicate because they need to communicate in order to get this person back, because they can't deal with it. You know, everyone's like, oh, but he loves me and he did it, but he like wants me back and says he loves me. And I feel like they're like, oh my God, how could you love me? And like, that's what I went through. I was like, how could you love? But yet we were in love, and it was very confusing for me. It was very confusing. So what I realized is that when a man or a woman has freedom as the top of their list, and they do something because they want the freedom and they want to be with the lads or whatever, and they did something stupid at the moment, and they're begging you back, right? And everyone's like, how could he be begging me back if he did that? And like, yeah, because he still loves you. He just valued freedom at that point, and it's not because he doesn't love. And that was like the hardest thing after cheating for me, was definitely thinking that I wasn't enough and that it was my fault, and like it was just, you know, different values and lack of communication. And then those things gave me closure because I couldn't get it, you know, like all those things like let me have closure, because I think was just thinking like I wasn't all me, but there's still an element of me. I still think like there is two people within that. And because my commitment issues, because of I was like, with that, it was like my way or the highway within the relationship. So there was no, and like he was acting in fear sometimes. And I think that's another thing that we can talk about, when a partner acts in fear because the other person is threatening to break up. And that person acts out of fear, and they don't do anything, or they don't talk about how they feel, because the other person's going to be like, okay, there's the door.
Well, exactly. And ultimately with that fear, it's the idea that, you know, we should never give ultimatums in a relationship, because they never, ever, ever work. But like you said, it can keep people in a box where they feel like, well, I can't be myself. And then they kind of get into that cycle of, inevitably, I'm going to mess up, or I'm going to be shown the door, so I'm just going to do it now. And it's the idea that one person can control a relationship. Whereas we know we can't control anything, but there's two people in a relationship. And that's why the 50-50 idea and model is so important, that we bring our 50-50, but we bring our baggage. We all bring our own individual baggage, and we need to accept each other in that. And really, I feel in relationships, acceptance is the key. You know, if we're saying, oh, well, you have to do X, Y, and Z to prove to me that you're a good person, or that you're going to treat me right, or this is exactly what a great person looks like, then that's just putting expectations on people who, one, I mean, it's your expectation, which is okay, but it may not be their expectation. And that doesn't mean that they're wrong and that you're right, or that you're, you know, so it's kind of acceptance, and it's knowing that everything is not personal. Like everything is not about you. And we become this in a relationship sometimes, you know, we ego ties. So we go, well, if he does this, that's a bit like, what's he saying about me? You know, this is, or that's a reflection of me and who I am. Whereas, like you said, a lot of the time people are dealing with their own fear, their own insecurities. It's nothing to do with you on some level, you know, when it's like, say, fear of commitment or something. The cheating thing obviously is slightly different. There is a lack, there is a reason why it's happened. But like you said, you can get to the bottom of that. But all these things are compounded usually by different ways of being, different areas, different experiences. And that's what makes relationships so complex. And that's why you can't say, oh, you know, if somebody's cheated on me, should I leave them? There's no simple answer to that. Like, it's not like yes or no. Everybody is really unique in that. And, you know, to be honest, for some couples who come through very difficult times, particularly around infidelity, I mean, it's one of the hardest things, I do believe, for couples to come back from, even though they do. But they can actually have a more enriched and fulfilled and a more loving relationship that can nearly last the test of time, sometimes because of that experience, if they've been able to really, really sit in each other's pain, hear each other, heal each other, like witness the shame and witness the hurt and not rush it, be patient, give it the time that it needs.
Yeah. It almost like awakens. But
Yeah.
then you just have people that are just doing it over and over again. You're like, no, like Tristan Thompson, no, calm yourself.
But that's
that's your boundaries broken. If your boundaries are broken more than once, it's your responsibility then, because you're taking them back over and over and over again. And it's like, there's
completely.
Yeah.
And that's fear of commitment though. So that's classic, the hopping, the relationship hopping, or I'm going to see multiple people. Like if somebody's consistently cheating in a relationship, they're self-sabotaging the whole time. So again, it's not even about that person, like Khloe Kardashian, or, it's about his inability to commit and his commitment fears, that he's just constantly doing this, do. And that's where you go, right, this is a cycle, this is a pattern, it's a thread. I will not change him. Leave him be. Thing. That's where, and like you said, where you have to go, okay, now I have to make a decision. Am I going to be in on this or not be in on it?
Yeah. And then there's even like everything, because I was chatting about the Tristan Thompson thing. It was like a big thing on my Instagram there. And I was like, there has to be something that is so fucked up. So I like went back and like went to see like his family relationship, and he doesn't speak to his dad, and his dad like literally portrays him to be this like person who's going to mess up his whole life. And like he made this statement saying, watch, he'll mess it up. And then he's acting out of what his dad thinks of him, which is really typical of that sort of, sort of even emotional abuse, like is a thing, like, or expectancy. So he's just acting out. And I'm like, well, there you go. You need to go deal with your daddy issues. And then maybe if you deal with your daddy issues, then you can, if I was Chloe now,
become
I'd be like,
responsible.
Okay,
well, completely. And become responsible for being an adult, and that we can't always go back to that. So clearly there's obviously something there with the dad, and it's very true. We say all the time that if we praise children and we build belief in them that they can be anything they want, they can do anything they want, that's all very true. But naturally what you're saying, the opposite is true. I mean, if we just tell our child all the time, you're a waste of space, you're not going to be anything, they eventually will grow up, they'll act out, they'll start doing all them things that basically prove that, because it's like, well, this is your impression of me anyway, until it becomes huge malfunction when they're older, they recognize, and then maybe want to change it or not.
Yeah.
But for him and her, it's obviously very sad. I mean, I think there is a piece where, what's going on for her in her background and in her past, where she is, I suppose, in one way accepting this behavior. Is it the idea that I can save him, I will change him? And is it tied up more with her self-worth staying there?
Yeah. And you know what? Proving. Like we were just saying this as well. We were like, if you are the person that can't stick to one woman, like you can actually find someone who is like in Bali, like open relationships are very common here. Like I really want to interview one on here, but I have spoke to a few open relationships here and try to understand like their point of view, and some of it makes so much sense, right? I know that sounds crazy because we're Irish and like Catholic, you're not allowed open relationship, but I spoke to these people and they were just like, it almost felt like they had no ego because they don't care what anyone else thinks. Like this is their needs. Like they are in a relationship and they're committed to being each other's partners for the rest of their life, but they have different sexual needs. So they go and they have just certain rules and stuff. Like obviously there are certain rules within the open relationship. Like maybe you don't do it in the same place, but if you're away for certain months of the year, whatever, like it's allowed in certain aspects. And the fact that they do what they feel is right for them and they don't care what anyone else thinks, it's got to do with like a big ego thing. But obviously, because another thing is when someone cheats, or even just like a boy is a fucking dick or something happens and they break up, sometimes people don't get back with people because of their ego. Like say the guy is really sorry for whatever he did and he really he understands it and blah blah blah, and like no, you make me look like a mug. That word mug stands with me so much. Everyone's like, you look like a mug, right? But that's ego speaking, because if you look at that person in the eyes and you think they've changed and you think they're not going to do that again, that was a silly mistake or whatever they did, whether it be cheating, whether it be just something else, and if you really truly believe that they are never going to do that again and that they're going to change, then like you need to get rid of your ego and like remove that. So I don't know how that turned into open relationships there, but
Yeah.
I just find it very interesting.
Yeah.
Because people,
But you're right.
yeah,
Yeah. Sorry, it's
people
the
were triggered
ability.
by it. They're like, no, I
Yeah.
could
Yeah.
never. There were people who are like, I could never, Sinead. Like, I need you to talk about this more. And I'm like, but it's because of our anxiousness as well and our insecurity that we can't trust our man to go and have sex and we're not fall in love with them.
Yeah.
Otherwise, these couples trust their men
Yeah.
enough, or their woman enough to not fall in love with, which is, it is like, I'm not going into an open relationship anytime soon,
Yeah.
but it's very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I think you can definitely see how it can work for couples.
yeah.
And through stages of life. I mean, part of it goes back to we come from our own families of origin. You know, we witness our own parents' relationships. Then we get with people, and then we expect everything to be rosy without any complications or, you know, any kind of ripple, you know, effects throughout the relationship, which one is a false expectation. I mean, why would we not expect that at some point we're going to hit a hurdle? And the other side is, I mean, are we people when we're in relationships that if we grow at different times, which we know we do, if we're growing and moving and changing as we get older, how do we keep that balance in all areas of the relationship? Like, who's to say that one person really is able to fulfill? Well, this is the point, is that we shouldn't put all our needs on one person. You know, we need to have like best friends. We need to have all these different people and activities around us to keep us fulfilled. Because who's to say that one person is actually there to satisfy all them needs? You know, is that too high an expectation? Like, let's be realistic.
100%.
And for somebody, for somebody who maybe has a really high sex drive, or somebody who's just very curious and open sexually, then maybe the idea of a swinging club or like a couple, you know, networker, that can work. And
it can work.
You know, it can take that stress maybe out of a couple's relationship. You know, if one was feeling, oh, I just can't keep up with this demand, but I respect that they're very sexual, or, you know, and like maybe the person doesn't want to leave their marriage. So it's just what works. You know, it's like, why do we, I suppose, cornerstone these things? Why can't we be open to what it is? And that doesn't mean that it's for everybody by any means, obviously. But when we hear of people who it is for, why, we can acknowledge and respect why it works. You know, once they have the boundaries and they're clear around the rules. Fascinating.
That's another podcast. I would, I'm like, I need to do that. I need to like interview someone, but like it might trigger like.
Definitely. Well,
you know, I mean,
if
someone's always triggered, it's fine.
Exactly.
But it's we've actually went a full hour, and I literally could sit here and talk to you all day. But there's just one, and like I was meant to ask you questions, but like I think everything was good there. Okay. So there was something I could ask you. Okay, that perception of a relationship being like, you know, easy. You know, I think because even when I was chatting about this before, someone was like, "Well, our relationship is easy," so I don't believe it. If it's not easy, you know, it shouldn't be. But then there is aspects of relationships that are easy for some people, but then like I actually think there is a lot of hard work that has to be done. And like there's times where, especially as someone who has commitment issues, when it comes to have these hard times, you almost want to flee because you're like, oh, this is hard. And that's a typical commitment issue person, and they're like, okay, I need to go. But like you need that realization of relationships are work sometimes, and you need to put the work in and the effort in. You know, like
100%. Yeah, 100%. I mean, I feel like, you know, when I'm with my couples and in my practice, like I'm always, you know, first thing is like, it's 50-50. Do you both want to be here? And the other thing is, you know, good relationships are hard work. And that's not to say that like, you know, hard work, like, oh, we're slogging away, but it's hard work because we have to give time, energy, we have to prioritize, we have to carve out space where even when we're not in the mood to have the chats about how somebody's feeling or how they're impacted by work or whatever, that we need to do that because we need to provide that for the other person. So it's coming past ourselves sometimes, even when we are tired, and that can become hard work. So I just feel that it's the balance. It's a bit like if everything's easy all the time, it's sort of like, well, what's missing? You know, like, is there real passion? Is there like great fun or excitement, or what is it that's keeping you attuned together? you know, and if both people can say, right, there's days where it's hard and there's days where it's wonderful, it also gives a realization that this is normal. Like you said, the expectation, especially for somebody with commitment fear, like when things get a bit awkward, they can kind of see it as, oh God, this is all doomed. It's going to like end in disaster. But it's about saying, no, we can actually work through this once we talk about it or acknowledge it and stand together and make a plan. And it's always about not feeling seen, heard, or validated or accepted. You know, they are like, we need them as children and we need them throughout our life. And we certainly need it in our core relationship, a romantic relationship. So, yeah, I mean, I think definitely my motto would be, it's like anything, you know, you don't succeed, not that you don't succeed, but I suppose you do very well in your career if you invest time into your career and you invest, like for yourself, you know, you're reading, self-development, learning, you're concentrating. So you're more likely going to be in places where you maybe didn't know you'd be, but you've put in the work. So it's the same in a relationship. You know, if you put in the work, you're most likely going to stay or get to better places together. And I mean, I often feel with my husband, like I love my husband more now than I did the day we got married and the day we were together. And I think that's, for me, is a turn of time. You know, it's kind of growing together and at times just letting each other grow and communicating and kind of coming back. And we've had lots of hardships as much as good times. But I suppose once you can be open and communicate that and know that it's part of the expectation, you can manage it.
Yeah.
Together if you both want to.
Yeah, love that.
No.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
Okay, I promise one more question, right? Okay, I promise
Okay.
one more, right? Okay, like I'm obsessed. Okay, but the questions, like I haven't even read through the questions, but I read over them, so they're kind of all very like similar. And what trust issues? How can we get over them? You know, especially like if someone's cheated before, or they just and are in general, you're an anxious attachment style, like you do have these trust issues, and you know, like especially we hear so much online and stuff, so we do fear when our partners go out, and we do have this fear. And you know, how can we get over the trust issues and become a better partner? Because the trust issues lead to the partner being pushed away almost sometimes, because it can be really like it can be such a struggle for them, and it can nearly lead them to down that path because they're like, well, I think that already, you know. And so what is your advice to anyone who needs to like get over these trust issues, or where do they, to be honest, there's no real advice, there's probably like a whole story, and you need to begin healing, but like where do you start, I suppose? Like what's best, or what's best books, or what, you know?
Yeah, like I really feel that for trust, like it is such a huge thing, obviously, and it's needed in a relationship. But if you find it hard to trust somebody, really you need to do individual work on yourself. So whether that means going to a therapist to explore past reasons as to why your trust has been broken and how you learn to build it up, or like there's great books like The Holistic Therapist, you know, Nicole, LePera.
How to do the work.
Book. Yeah, love
therapy
that book.
Therapy in a book. That and I Am Enough by Marisa Peer. It's very similar vibe, like, you know, going back to childhood and figuring out
Fabulous.
Very good.
Yeah, very simple, broke down, effective. I find they're not too psychology or psychotherapy books, you know, too heavy. Anyone can read them and still really connect. The thing is, if you're in a relationship and somebody's cheated on you though, and now you're trying to rebuild trust, that's quite different again, because there's different levels of trust. I suppose I think you need to ask yourself, 1, do I want to get past this? 2, can I see that this is not all about me? 3, is this worth it? You know, sometimes when you have an avoidant, anxious attachment style, being with somebody who has, I suppose, cheated or broken your trust in some way, it may just be too much for that person, you know? So you really have to kind of have them frank and honest conversations with yourself, but more importantly, getting the support that you need to be able to explore it. Like, I suppose from my perspective, look, I'm big on therapy, you know, like I even through my training, I was in 10 years of therapy myself because that was part of the process. So I believe and I understand the whole development piece. So I really recommend that. Or like that, starting out with a good book that's can break things down, that you might connect to snippets and then go, okay, how can I look at this a bit more? Or what could I do a little course on to find out a bit more for me? But communication is key. And the idea of, am I in a place right now to be able to begin to trust this person again? And if you're like, no, they're completely this person that I can't trust, then you have to say, well, why am I here right now? It's time to do a bit of work on yourself.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're just projecting onto that person again and again and again. And the behavior usually will continue. And like you said, or it could drive them away. It can potentially be like, right here, this is not what I signed up for, because that in itself can be a form of emotional abuse as well.
Yeah. And I think as well, like therapy is the best thing for it as well, like in my opinion, because even when you have trust issues, you think it's about relationships, sometimes it's about your friendships, sometimes it's about things sometimes it's about something so small as like someone letting you down at a birthday party, like these small things really affect you, and you have to, in therapy, you go through those things. And even like, I've had such trouble this year with like some of my trust circle, my friends, I've had my trust betrayed, and those things affect my issues with anyone. Like, so you need to even go into just anything, like even to trust a friend enough. Like for me, that's really difficult because of my stuff being online as well. And like all my stuff, like such say personal things that I've told someone end up online and stuff. And I'm just like, how do I trust like those things? You know what I mean? And then I need to go to therapy, and then but anyway, so it's not just about, like some little things can affect you. Like if a friend betrays you, that can also affect
that can
your
be a
relationship.
Huge betrayal. And like that, you need the space where it's facilitated. And sometimes we don't actually know until, I think the beauty of a therapy room is that you just have this space where there's no judgment, and you have to trust that whatever's coming out on that day for you, or what you're saying, that it needs to be there. And that's where your therapist can then round things up and bring them to you in a sense of asking you them questions that you're unable to ask in your own head, so that you can really kind of get to the bottom of what situation or what triggers be happening in order to heal and move forward with trust. Because friendships are very powerful, and they leave a big impact, particularly in teenagers. Usually that's their first time where they have kind of that breakdown of a friendship or a betrayal, and it's very powerful. It can really, really wound, create a wound that needs to be healed.
Amazing. Oh my God, I love this podcast. See, relationships. So I buzz off this. Like
they're amazing.
You're like me, you like buzz. And like I didn't know that you were like had commitment issues as well. And I'm like, we're vibing, we're connecting. And like
definitely.
it always brings your passion whenever you like have your own stuff and you want to.
Completely.
I love that. So thank you so much for coming on here today, especially when you are, just about to give birth. So,
you're
so I'm glad I caught you before, and I'm so happy because I think people will get a lot from this podcast as well. And you just let us know where we can find you and your podcast.
Amazing. So my Instagram is Jen_Cameron_, and I have the Power of You podcast, which is available on Spotify and all leading podcast platforms like yourself. Woo! But thank you so much, Sinead. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. It's been amazing, and a great way to finish my last day pre-baby number 4.
And congrats.
Thanks.
Look forward to it. But thank you so much. And thank you for listening, guys.